Hey everybody, it's Ashley, and in today's video, we are going to be preserving food. We've got 4 different methods we're going to use today. We're going to be canning, fermenting, freezing, and dehydrating. Each of these food preservation methods are going to be serving a different purpose for us. And so as we go through each one, I'll show you what we're doing and why we're doing it. Sometimes I think of this time of year as a little bit of an off season for food preserving. However, I think that you'll find that this is the kind of stuff that can be done any time of year, and you'll see exactly why. So let's get right to it. After getting my Instant Pot filled about halfway with water, I'm just gonna add a little bit of salt and a little bit of apple cider vinegar. The apple cider vinegar will help to pull out a lot of the good ingredients and nutrients out of the chicken. So the first thing we're gonna do, I should say that, is we're gonna make some chicken broth. So what I do is I put it on for 90 full minutes, and then after that is done, I let my chicken cool down, and then I put all the skin and bones and basically any of the non-meat back in for an additional time. And I'll kind of walk you through that when we get to that point. The great thing about doing broth and getting it started first is that it's so hands-off. It just needs to go. So that's why I do that first. Okay, the very next thing we're gonna get onto is making some chili. In one of my more recent videos, I showed you how I was preparing to go on a trip so that I could have all the food done. And let me tell you what, it was like the best thing ever. And I did a chili, and I didn't really show much of the details on how I made it. So I thought I'd be a little bit more thorough today and kind of show you more of the details on how I make my chili. But chili is so personal too. I think that, you know, just because I make it a certain way doesn't mean that anybody would follow the steps that I use. And also, I don't use a recipe, so it does come out different every time. So the first thing is we're just gonna get this sauteing, browning up. I'm just gonna add a little bit of olive oil because it is a pretty lean beef. Now we've got some carrots, celery, as well as onions out that we're gonna get chopped in just a minute. I have been soaking these beans since yesterday afternoon. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these rinsed off, and then we'll start chopping vegetables. With regards to beans, you can really use any kind of beans your family enjoys. I have a tremendous amount of black beans, so there's by far more black beans than anything else in here. I had these that I actually grew this year. They almost look like a pinto bean, but they're so much brighter. They're the most amazingly bright colored things that I'm so excited to use, because this is the first recipe that I'm using them in. And then I had a little bit of remnants of some pinto beans. One thing that I do like to do as I cook is season. I try not to season all at once. So I'm gonna add a little bit of pepper. Oh, those are the beans, not the salt. And then a little bit of salt, just as this meat is browning. We are gonna be actually canning this chili, which I don't even know that I've canned chili before. I know I've canned a lot of different kinds of soups and things like that, but maybe not specifically chili. Just a little side note, this enamel cast iron is amazing. Everything I make in here is so good. We did a live recently, just a few days ago actually, and I kind of went on a little tangent about this, and I highly recommend getting one. It doesn't have to be one of the super expensive ones. This one is a Lodge brand, which I think is a little bit more affordable, and they work beautifully. So with canning something like chili, well, you know what? I'm not gonna use carrots. I don't know why I took those out. We are gonna use a sweet potato though. There we go. This just gives, I don't know, I've been doing it the last handful of times I've been making my chili, and it turns out so nice. It just adds the sweetness, a little bit more vegetable, and anyway, it's great. And it's different than adding a carrot, which sometimes I do. We've got our beans pre-cooking. I wanna do that a little bit. There are some sort of components to beans that can interfere a little bit with absorption of nutrients and things like that. So by pre-cooking them a little bit, I'm gonna mitigate a little bit more of that. Soaking also helps. And then of course the pressure canning process will pressure cook them, and that's gonna help as well. Now when it comes to pressure canning soup, one of my big issues that I have is that I don't want to completely cook my soup to the point where I would be eating it, serving it on my table, and then go ahead and put it in a canner for another 90 minutes. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm just going to start the process and kind of be able to get a good feel for the seasonings. And then I will go ahead and put it in jars so that it'll get some time to kind of meld. I can kind of taste it, and then it can do the rest of the long, sort of slow cooking that it does while it's in the canner. We're going to put 2 pints of frozen broth in this chili. I really like this brand of tomato products, and so I'm going to add a large 28 ounce can of their tomato sauce. For seasonings, we're going to add garlic and onion powders, chili powder and paprika, oregano, celery salt, turmeric, and of course, salt and pepper. Turmeric is a great way to add color to brighten things up, so that's why I put it in. From here, I'm going to start tasting and adding more of the things that I just mentioned as needed. I ended up adding a second sweet potato as it just seemed like there was hardly any in there. I added more broth as well, and so tasting as you go is an important way for you to get the taste that you want in the final product. After the flavor was just right, I added in the beans and gave it a stir. Then I got the chili into wide mouth pint jars with 1 inch of headspace, processed at 11 pounds of pressure for 90 minutes. I realized later I didn't need to go for the 90 minutes because I'm using pints. I think it was probably supposed to be maybe 75 minutes, but I'm so used to pressure canning in quarts that I just sort of defaulted to that. And it's fine, you can over process pints, it's not gonna do anything, but you wanna make sure that you don't do the opposite, which is to process quarts for the time that pints are supposed to be processed for. After the Instant Pot was done with the first round for the broth and released naturally, which took maybe another 50 minutes, it was kind of a long time, I lifted the chicken out and allowed it to cool. From there, I picked apart the meat for eating and put everything else back in the Instant Pot. So this is going to be the skin, the bones, the cartilage, all that connective tissue and things like that. Then I added the celery, and I added some celery and then put it back in for an additional 50 minutes. Broth also tastes amazing with bay leaves, but I was out, so I just skipped it today. So we'll get back to the broth after the second round is done through the Instant Pot, but right now we're going to get the last 2 projects started together. We ordered 5 extra heads of cabbage from our winter CSA this week, and one of them we are going to dehydrate. We already put this through the food processor with the 2mm blade, and I'll make sure that the full video of dehydrating cabbage is linked so you can see the whole process. But I'm going to do it the same way, which is at 125 degrees Fahrenheit for about 8 to 10 hours. It's evening, so by morning this will be all done. After that, we will get the remaining 4 heads of cabbage shredded so we can make sauerkraut. A bigger than needed bowl is highly recommended so that mixing is easier. I didn't want to go get my 33 quart bowl out this evening, so I paid for it, and I paid for it with the lack of bowl space. So after getting everything shredded in the bowl, we added 1/2 tablespoon of salt for each head of cabbage, which is, I'm guessing, around 3 pounds each. Then I tried to stir it a little bit in order to get the natural juices in the cabbage to start to come out and release, and then to break it down and just make it easier to stir. But we had to do it in small increments because there was so much cabbage in this bowl. While we give time for this kraut to just sit and allow the juices to start flowing, the chili is done in the canner, so we can get that out. I put down a dish towel and put jars directly from the canner to that. Because jars are so hot straight out of the canner, this is a good idea, so there isn't too much of a temperature shock between the jar and the counter itself. The chili will just sit here all night, and we will then remove the rings and wash the jars in the morning. The broth is also done with the final step of cooking, so we can get that sifted out. We will use a fine mesh colander. That's what we typically use. We use the same one every time. So we can separate the broth out. From there, it will sit covered in our back porch until the morning as well, when we can then transfer it to jars to be frozen. Doing broth in a cool climate this time of year is great because you can just put it outside or in a porch, which is what we are going to do. So back to the sauerkraut, eventually we were able to get it to where we could really punch things down. And this is a very important step because sauerkraut doesn't taste as good unless the cabbage cell structure has basically been broken down. It is worth taking the time to do this. I've gotten impatient before and went easy on this step, but I don't do that because the results are pretty drastically different. The kraut can't ferment in the same way if the cabbage has that structure intact. So for making the sauerkraut, we're going to do a brine. We're going to do a ratio of 2 cups of filtered water to 1 tablespoon of sea salt. Once the jars are filled, it's important to make sure that the cabbage stays submerged in the brine. So whatever brine is needed to bring to the level of the cabbage and then some is what we need to do. Kraut also has a better result if the air temperature is slightly cooler. So if you don't have any cool spaces, that's fine. The countertop will work great. We're going to toss this into our pantry this time, as this pantry is outside of our basement footprint and isn't heated. So it just naturally stays much cooler, especially on the floor. And then we will ferment it for several weeks, keep checking it periodically until we think it's done. From there, we'll just put it in the back of the fridge, and then we'll take some out to fill quart jars, and those quart jars is what we will use to eat and dish out of. So here we are the next day. The broth is cooled, and I'm going to just fill these wide mouth pint jars. They are highly preferred for freezing because the sides are straight up and down. There's no neckline or anything like that. But even so, there is a mark on the jar that says where to fill it if you are freezing, which is super helpful. As expected, the cabbage that was dehydrating overnight was dry in the morning. We went ahead and took this off of the dehydrating trays and put it in a half-gallon container with an airtight seal. It is great if you can vacuum seal this as a dehydrated product, but today we will go with this jar, and I'll explain more why in just a minute. Using a large baking sheet like this can be helpful in so many ways, especially when moving dehydrated food back and forth. There was still a mess. It was a little less than it would have been, though, if I had used something that was differently shaped or smaller. We just got all of the broth jarred up. We got our cabbage also in a good airtight jar. It's not vacuum sealed, but this will at least preserve it for maybe like a week or so until I blend it into a powder. We tore through our last head of dehydrated cabbage because I mixed it in with our regular greens powder, and I had like a full quart, and now that's gone. We're on to the next thing. So I will be powdering this very soon, but I thought I would leave it in this form until I'm ready to actually get it in the mixture. So all in all, things went pretty good. I think I'm really excited to have all of these different ways of preserving food at my fingertips because they can be used as tools in different ways. So we've got 8 pints of chili. One thing that kind of surprised me, well, first of all, I was super excited to double stack my canner because I've never done that before. However, I had 2 of the 10 jars not seal. One I caught last night, I could just tell it wasn't going to seal. And then the one I caught this morning. So I'm not sure why that happened. And I know it wasn't because it was the jar on top or on bottom, because I know one of the jars that didn't seal last night, I know that that one was on the bottom, but I don't know where this one was. And if that interfered in any way, or if the rack interfered in any way. So as my first experience, I had 2 not seal. I'll definitely try it again because that's super exciting to be able to pack that canner. But I'm going to be watching for jars that don't seal. And I used all the same lids. They were all ball lids, which, you know, that is not normally an issue for me at all. So we got a half gallon of this. I will link my dehydrated cabbage video if you want to see all the details on how I get this all the way into powdered form. This is probably going to end up being, well, not even a cup of powder. And then we ended up with 7 pints of broth. This is actually, I go low on the pint just to ensure that it doesn't pop the lid or anything like that. So that's more like a cup and a half per. And we have, I'm going to say 2 gallons of sauerkraut started, which is probably the thing that I'm the most excited about. I mean, this is so utilitarian. I use this all the time. And this is actually something I wanted to really get going for Thanksgiving. This is just health boost. It's just like, yes, of course, this is going to be a great tool for us next week. But this is going to be something that's going to carry us for a while. Now, we do go through sauerkraut very quickly. We can easily sit down and eat a quart in one sitting between all of us. And even then it's not enough. So I got this quart going. I'm gonna have to be a lot more hands-on and push this down because I don't have a jar in there, but I was able to fit last night a little half pint jar in here. But I still will go in and push things down daily and just kind of mess around with it. And you can see that that liquid is already not clear. When we put it in, it was just clear salt water. And now it's already clouding up, which means that the fermentation process has already started just in the last 12 hours. Let me know if you're doing any sort of off-season canning or winter canning or food preservation that is using just stuff that maybe is a fall crop or things you find in the grocery store or meals you're putting together. I greatly appreciate you being here, coming along with as I do all this stuff. I hope you have a wonderful day and we will see you soon.